Hello, everyone, and welcome back. For those of you who joined yesterday, welcome again. For those of you who are new to the program, a very warm welcome and a happy World Oceans Day today. My name is Jerel Espelund, and I will be your host throughout the program. For those of you who didn't join yesterday, we have also producer Cecile Pilon-Hugh from SIWI, who will take care of all the technical bits and pieces and help us through the program here. World Water Week Communications Initiative 2022 has been developed in cooperation with the Grundfos Foundation. And this year we will focus on the theme of World Water Week, seeing the unseen, the value of water. And during these 2 coming weeks, many of the workshop sessions will center around the theme headings: value of water for people and development, financial and economic value of water, value of water for nature and climate change. Today is a workshop that's more specialized for journalists, but as I mentioned yesterday, you are more than welcome to join any of the workshops, journalists or communicators. And the full schedule of all the programs is found on worldwaterweek.org. We will post the link in the chat window so that you can have that once again. If you have any questions, just send me an email. Same email as I've been communicating with you previously, garl.espelund@siwi.org. If you have any technical issues during the session, please send a chat to Cecile and she will take care of that. For those of you who so wishes, it's possible to get automatic transcript on Zoom, and we'll ask you to write the questions to the speakers in the chat window, and then we'll keep all the questions until after the presentations. It's just more practical that way. And what else? We will record the sessions and I will send you YouTube links afterwards. Yesterday's sessions I just got the YouTube links and I will send them to you after this program. And I think that's enough about me and we're going to introduce you to the first speaker, Martina Klimes, advisor, water and peace at SIWI. And you are going to talk about something I think we all struggle with on more or less a daily basis, misinformation, and also something that came up yesterday in the very last session. So we connect back to yesterday and speak more about misinformation and how we build resilience against it. Welcome, Martina, over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Jerel. And I would like to say thank you very much also for having me. I'm very happy to be able to talk about this very important issue to all of you. I normally work mainly with issues related to shared water resources under the framework of water diplomacy and the wider debate of water and peace. And during this work, I came to this topic, and I can say that this is something, this topic has become very close to my heart. And I really see that this is one way how we can all directly contribute to issues that are very important for our society. And before I go into the topic, I can share how this really became that during water diplomacy, we started thinking about issues related to disinformation and misinformation and malinformation. There's a lot of terminology. It's once we were hosting a very special meeting between 2 countries that have a shared challenge related to share water resources, and the meeting was on a very high level. And at one point we actually were all on a boat together and we had dinner there. And then one of the very high level participants told me during this dinner, he said that, you know, we really struggle with the public perception of this issue, because maybe we can find agreement, we can find a technical solution to this, but this is very difficult to talk to the public about this. And there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation campaigns around water. And we as engineers and we working with technical issues, we really don't know how to approach this topic. And that was really the reason why we started looking at this more closely. And we discovered this quite a big topic. And in the context of shared water resources, it's still fairly new. But I will also, in my presentation, I will also include a little bit the issue around misinformation and climate change, because that is really directly related. I'm very happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation, but should something be very unclear, please do not hesitate to interrupt me, and I'd be happy to explain. So as I said, with this topic, there is a lot of terminology. And I just wanted to share the slides and tell you that the issue around the disinformation, or sometimes we say information influence campaigns, it's only one part of a very much larger topic. And I think I'm listing a few of these examples. I think that many of you are familiar, for example, with the fake media. When we have these deceptive identities, we have a fake social media accounts. We have a fake websites that look like a real newspaper, but they are really just designed on purpose for spreading disinformation. We have something called deep fakes. That is through the different recording technologies, you can really have images and people saying things that are not real. And I think if you just put in YouTube deep fakes, you will see President Obama saying things that are it's a fabricated video using the deep fake technology. You can also use that. This was used a lot on personal attacks. It's used often in war zones when we have images from different conflicts being then presented as images from different other conflicts. It's very common with the conflict in Syria, very common with the conflict in Ukraine. And then the issue of disinformation. This is really information purposely tailored and fabricated, designed to really produce a different reality. We also have misinformation that can be correct information that's just used in a wrong context. And then there is a spelling mistake, it should be malinformation. That is also something that's purposely designed to target a specific topic. We also, of course, have leaking and hacking. And then I think the way how we use social media have become a very important part of a communication tool, and the ways how the algorithm works and how they are set up, that also can create issues like echo chambers, that once we open a certain article, then the technology will offer us very similar articles, and then we will end up in this echo chamber. So this is really something that is part of this bigger picture. So today I will focus mainly on disinformation and misinformation and malinformation, but I would like you to know that this is part of a much bigger debate. And then this is how does this work? So we would like to know, how is disinformation created? So first, it's the people who would wish to affect the public opinion about certain issue. They find cracks in the field. They find that they think about what's the target audience, what is the audience where we would like to change their perception of a certain issue. One of the most famous disinformation campaigns were, for example, related to Brexit referendum vote. We have a lot of disinformation campaigns on COVID. Vaccination. Even before COVID, there was a lot of disinformation on vaccination related to other diseases. There's a lot of disinformation about climate change, and we also do see disinformation about shared water resources. So the person who orders this disinformation analyzes the audience and the environment and really finds the cracks. There is a doubt, is there enough information? And for you as the media professionals, this is really the time which is very important, because I would say that for journalists, very important task is to eliminate these cracks. So why disinformation thrive is because we may not have enough information existing about certain topic. It's very difficult. For example, the issue related to climate change can appear very complex. We have many scientific studies that are not so easily digestible for general public. So that really creates a lot of cracks in the system. And that creates a space where we can really create very simple messages, very professionally designed, that really use this methodology, that really aim to influence opinion. So in the general rule with disinformation is that it's very difficult to respond to each example of disinformation, but the importance is to set on prevention. It's the same with conflicts. It's much cheaper to focus on conflict prevention than later on conflict mitigation or conflict resolution. So very important is to really focus on prevention and really work with the space in which disinformation thrives. So it's really the first chain. But then if there is an opportunity, then they build an issue around a certain information. When we have that, we call it that they weaponize it. They really purposefully prepare a campaign that's tailored really to affect opinion. Then when we are launching the campaign, we really plant the seeds. Then it starts the first copying. They create certain accounts that, for example, share the information. Some of them are people who genuinely believe it. Some of them, and that also comes in the amplify stage, are called the so-called useful idiots, people who find it that this is much easier digestible information. It's information that really fits with my view of the world, and it's something that I can identify. It's presented in a very simple way. And usually the people, when you do the build and seed, you create, because you know your audience very, very well. For example, with the Brexit referendum, the undecided people, it was only 2% of the voters, and the people who really planned the disinformation campaigns, they knew very well about, from social media analytical tools, they knew very well about the behavior of these people. They knew very well what kind of news they read, what kind of interest they have. So then during this process, when you are building, seeding, and later copying and amplifying, you already know so much about your target audience. So you already know very well how to plan the news. And then if there is a need, of course, you can also manipulate the information. That can also include that maybe the entity that ordered this kind of campaign denies that they were involved. That can also happen. You can also then manipulate the message according to how the situation evolves. And at the end is the effect phase, when you really harvest the fruits. Then that means that you change public opinion about a certain issue. So I would like to say that this is a really very carefully designed mechanism. It is done by professionals. Of course, then you can have many different groups active in many different countries. You can even order such campaign. Of course, it depends on how far one can go and how much one can afford. But this is a very serious issue. It's, of course, many lobby groups, they work with this. They don't shy away from, for example, when working with affecting public opinion. So for us, it's very important to see how we can really affect the environment in which this process is possible and in which disinformation thrives. And now, if we go directly to water, what do we have to think when we think about water-related disinformation? One part, it's data science. And you may know that the very technical data about shared water resources and technical data about water, for example, technical data about groundwater, which we cannot see, it's very boring. This really doesn't make usually the raw science doesn't make very exciting news. If you start explaining the processes, for example, how aquifer is refilled, this really doesn't make something very exciting. We then also have the complex debate about climate, about the changing climate, where we still a lot of projections are disputed because there is a lot of effort to really prove that, for example, climate change is not affected by people. And then in that we have the political environment. In many countries, we have people who maybe benefit from the current situation, who would like to really control the message, who would like to see. Also, one thing is that it's very difficult sometimes in the context of shared water resources to do compromise. For example, for upstream country, that sometimes is a political suicide in certain contexts. So this adds to the complexity. And then it's also about communication. Generally, for example, engineers and people who work with the more of the technical side, sometimes they don't work with communication professionals. It's only recently that they have a communication departments and where they are more focused on that and really think about the messages. But this is not really the default, because the default is really to find a technical solution for these issues. So we don't really think, or we cannot afford to put so much resources on the communication part. And this is an example. This is something that was actually presented by one of our colleagues from UNESCO who works with disinformation and in the context of climate change. And then what are some of the key messages and why it works this way? Its problem is the way how disinformation and our climate change, but also about water is designed, is they emphasize the uncertainty about the trend. For example, now that we know that scientists do agree that humans do cause the changing climate. But then the other campaign is really emphasizing that there is no certainty, that the reports do not agree, and really exaggerating this. Again, emphasizing the uncertainty about the attribution of humans. This is also something, because then, of course, then it goes to the need to change economic, the need to change behavior, really rethinking investments, and really rethinking, for example, economies of certain regions and countries. And this is a very complex issue. Then the other, it would be that we claim that the impacts are not serious or that are even beneficial. We've seen many articles on that it really is, the projections are really not real, and that we can even benefit from the impacts of climate change. And then a very big part, and now we see it more and more, is warning about the mitigation, that the mitigation is really something that will negatively affect our communities, that will, often we talk about employment security, sometimes even food security, interestingly, but this is also, this is sometimes extremely powerful and very impactful with certain groups, specifically in the regions dependent, for example, on economy related to fossil fuels. Other trends that we see is producing counterfeit science, these are newspaper articles that I took from different types of articles that were misleading information. So, for example, one article was explaining why scientists disagree about global warming, and was using something that was really presented of scientific studies, but that was really, of course, not related to the trends. We also see often in some cases that there is a harassment of scientists who talk about these issues. A lot of this is, of course, on climate. There was a case that actually our colleagues from the Stockholm Resilience Center, when they published a study on food security, talking, for example, about that it would be beneficial for climate if we do not consume as much meat, that they were actually also subjected to harassment. So this is then something more and more, and maybe then many scientists are then not so willing to talk to media about something that can be in certain communities and certain contexts regarded as controversial. It's not very easy to start saying that, yes, we will need to, it's very unpopular, some of the things that will be needed. So then many scientists are just more hesitant, for example, to be interviewed. And then we also have manufacturers uncertainty with no scientific basis. This is this article about glaciers and this whole debate. Again, very common. So what should we do? How should we, it's of course, you as journalists, the best would be produce communication material, articles, and reach out to as many people as possible, and really explain the current situation and explain the need how to think about the future. That's the most important. But other very basic advice is first stop and think before sharing something. And this is really, when I showed you the chain of the disinformation kill chain, it's really about thinking, often these news are framed in a very sensationalist way. It's framed as something very exciting, and it's they do count on it that many of it will be shared before even reading it, that people just read the headline and something very alarming, and then it's being shared. So very important is to think before sharing. We see from social media that often people believe more to what they receive, for example, from relatives, from family, for different networks that they trust, than what's presented in the media. So it's very important that this is also controlled. Then for you as journalists, it's very important to have your networks for fact checking. And here I can give an example on a project that SIWI has been working on for some time, and maybe some of you are part of that. We have this network for Eastern Nile journalists. When we created this community of journalists from Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And during one of our workshops, we actually brought them to the Gert Dam in Ethiopia, so they could really see the dam. But the purpose is also that they get to know each other, and they have contacts when there is some information, something very sensationalist. It's easy for them to share, to check. It's easy for them to contact their colleagues and say, we hear reports about this. Is it really happening? What is really the situation on the ground? What is happening in your country? And this is very important. So think about the network you have and how you can use it for fact checking. And of course, it depends on in which region you work, and then on which topic you work. And I know that many journalists do have these networks, but think about it, how we can even grow your networks for fact checking, how we can work with that. How are you using them? How are you updating them, for example? So this is something very important. And then we have a number of online fact-checking tools, and these are some of the examples. So this is something that when we are uncertain about certain reports, then there are a few, some of them are based in the West, but then there are also some that are working with different regional outlets, for example, the Reporters Lab. So this really gives us the opportunity to check and to use this and to really see. For example, the side check affiliated to Flag Check is can tell you if some reports that are used in articles and referred to, you can check if these are really actual scientific reports. So this is very good, and I hope you will get this presentation. So this is something that you can definitely look through all these sources, and there are many more, but these are some of the main sources that are used in this context. And then during our discussion, I would like to hear from you if you're already maybe using some of them. I'd be very interested to know. And then here, I wanted to show one example of a specific disinformation on shared water resources. And it was a case between India, Nepal, and Bhutan. There were reports in June 2020 in Indian newspaper that Nepal and Bhutan are not willing to cooperate on some critical shared water infrastructure. And if we think about the context, it was in a context, there was a lot of border tension between India and Nepal and other parts of the region. There, of course, were a lot of skepticism about some of the impacts of climate change. The region experienced a lot of droughts, a lot of landslides, a lot of natural disasters that were really related to the impacts of climate change. And then there was also a lot of mistrust in general between the countries. So then in the newspaper, they were, or in different reports and also lots on social media, there were these reports that Bhutan has stopped essential supply of water to farmers in India. And you have here the picture that was presented on different social media. And you see it's simple. The message is very simple. There is a picture and it's even highlighted in red and it's really sensationalist. So this is how it was presented. And then there were other reports that the Nepal prohibited Indian engineers to carry out regular flood work and maintenance on a dam. And then later, of course, this all proved to be fake news. This all was disinformation. The Bhutan Ministry of Foreign Affairs denied these reports, but when Foreign Ministry denied such a report, of course, it's not presented in this very flashy, very simple method as was used in the disinformation campaigns. And then the reason why the engineers didn't meet this was because some of the COVID regulations, it was not really that Nepal was actively prohibiting their engineers to carry out work. often what we see is then later when we work with the explain that, you know, this is not disinformation and we really work with that, it's not presented in the same way. So it's not shared as much. It doesn't receive so much attention. It's the same if somebody, as you know, if somebody issues an apology, that is always very rarely it gets as much attention as the real news. So this is just one of the examples, and then you can, I'd be happy to discuss, to tell you about others in questions. And the last thing is what we do at SIWI. I wanted to tell you that we actually actively work with governments in helping them or think how do they communicate about some of these challenges. And this is a workshop we had with the Afghan government in February 2020. And one of the reasons why the government said that it's so difficult to really strengthen this, what we call communication resilience, is that they don't have enough capacity and human resources. And I think this is really very coming by producing articles on these topics. There is a lack of internal cooperation between different departments, not enough data, and lack of information to use. So I really wanted to end, this is my last slide, I really wanted to end with this for you to really show you where do you fit in, why your work is so extremely important, and how you can contribute to strengthening communication resilience, which I personally believe is also part of security. I do believe that disinformation negatively affects our security across the globe. So this is all from me. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions, and also maybe to you, if you can share your experience, if you came across a fake news campaign and how it was later dealt with. I'd be very interested in hearing this.
Thank you very much, Martina. Very interesting and a bit scary, I must say. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to guard ourselves against with all this information flow. Just a quick question to you. The chat and the question is, the window for question is open. How do you protect yourself from all these disinformations, campaigns, fake news? What do you do yourself?
Is it a question to me?
Yes.
I think it depends. It's on the issues that I work with that I really have some deeper knowledge. I actually find it fascinating to look for this fake news because it helps me to understand who tries to affect the different discussions and different dialogues. But on other issues that I don't work with, for example, issues related to the COVID campaign, I can admit that even though I am somehow working with these issues, it's difficult to say that one is completely immune. So one would be to really know the sources. So for example, with the COVID, I always then would go to WHO website and try to see, you know, what is there. Again, in my network, try to see who is really an expert on this issue and talk only to them. And to be really restrictive with what you share. So don't share anything that you are not 100% sure of.
Yes, very good tips there. I wrote down one fact-checking organization that I came across, africacheck.org. We had a presenter from Africa Check last year with the communications initiative. And if any of the participants, you are around the globe, please, if you have any other fact-checking organizations or such, please share with us in the chat. It's much appreciated. And then Marissa asks you, Martina, are there additional Spanish resources that you can share in this matter?
Unfortunately, I don't know about any specific Spanish ones because I myself do not speak Spanish, so I would not be using them, but I definitely know who to ask. I can ask a colleague in my network who actually is Spanish. So, and he works with these issues mainly related to election, but he would really know very much about the particular Spanish language fact-checking issues. So I'd be very happy to get back to you on that. I will write my email in the chat, and if you send me an email, I will respond to you.
Right. And also you can, once you have those answers, you can email them to me, Martina, and I will share them with the rest of the group as well. Do we have any other questions coming up? There we have the email. Otherwise, I would like to ask something that you and I briefly spoke about when we talked but the bots and how much of disinformation is created by bots. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
There are different statistics, but we know, for example, that the COP meetings are particularly targeted with disinformation campaigns. There was a study following this in the case of COP in Katowice, and that it was 35% of all news or tweets on Twitter related to the COP in Katowice was created by bots. So 35%, it's a huge number. And that, of course, then you see the chain that gets later amplified. So when we engage these bots and we prepare, this is in the first phase. This is when we weaponize and we build. This is when we are really building this. And then the big problem with this is then often it's just then shared by real individuals, real accounts. This is how it then gets amplified, that you create something and you create, for example, fake media pages, and that then it's shared by somebody's uncle, and people just say, no, this is my uncle, I really trust my uncle, why would I then fact check about this? And this is a huge problem in many regions. In many regions, when, for example, there is a very low trust in governments, people tend to trust more their relatives. And then there are these big, for example, WhatsApp chains that go, and then people just use it to share information instead of using media. So we know that, for example, WhatsApp, they limited the number of people you can have in a group when sharing messages, but maybe that is really not the answer. I think in this case, if I may say, I was thinking about what do I do in a case like this, and then it's very good to have a, for example, article that really then contradict or that explains how it really is in reality. So that's why it's very useful to have articles that you produce and other materials, because this is one of the answers. Sometimes I try to share, for example, the ICCP reports, and that's, it's not very exciting readings. Many people don't want to dive into that very long report. So it would be much better to have a one-page article with very simple words, maybe very simple statistics, very simple numbers, that really is more digestible for a larger audience.
That's great. And that's where we as journalists and communicators come into the picture, to build a counterattack to the bots. And you were mentioning a little bit about how media and journalists build trust and the importance of fact checking and having reliable sources. Is there any, because I mean, the trust in government can be quite low in many countries, but also trust in media is quite low, even sometimes in a country like Sweden, which isn't a very old democracy. How do we improve media? How do we make sure that the public trusts the media better? That will be short answer, but still, I'm interested to hear.
That's a very difficult question, and I would actually be interested in some of our people here on the call actually would like to reflect on that and maybe share experience from their countries. Even if you don't have a question, maybe you would like to, share your experience with this issue. But I think it's a long process, and we need to claim accountability from the media. They are a very important part of our society, and I think that is us who, through like our leverage that we have, to really, be demanding that we really be this is not just for, it's not for entertainment. It's a very important segment of our society. It's very important for democracy. It's very important for the whole future. So I would say find ways how we can have leverage over these groups and really, say that we really need you to be performing as an independent media.
Thank you very much. And if anyone would like to share, the chat is open throughout the session. You're welcome to share also after Martina has said goodbye, which you will unfortunately do very soon. But I mean, I'm also available if you want to share later on. Just drop me an email and I will share with the group and with Martina, because I think it's a very important issue that we must keep on discussing. Thank you so much, Martina, for joining us on the Communications Initiative. And we will now welcome our next speaker, Thank you,
Thank you very
Martina.
much for having me, and I hope that you enjoyed the workshop, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the World Water Week. I hope that many of you
and we will keep on talking about misinformation on World Water Week. Yes, thanks a lot.
Sure.
Thank you, Martina.
Bye.
And welcome, Xanani. Xanani Baloyi, there we go.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Gonna share my screen.
Yes, Program Officer at SIWI, Xanani will be talking to us about red-fed agriculture in Africa and how to combine advocacy with action and business. So you're talking to us from Pretoria, is it?
Yes, I am based in Pretoria at SIWI's Africa Regional Center.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting today about an initiative that SIWI embarked on in 2018, which is an advocacy initiative for transforming investments in African rain-fed agriculture. So just a bit of background or the rationale for why we wanted to implement or maybe try to enhance rain-fed agriculture on the African continent. So according to statistics, we've got about 5.5% of cultivable land in Africa, which is irrigable, and that is just a natural phenomenon. And also there's 94.5% of the cultivable land, therefore it is rain-fed. I've got this illustration on the side of my screen. And then we also have 65% of the population that is employed directly or indirectly in agriculture in the African continent. And you also note that the youngest population that you can find is also in Africa, but then also weathering situations like unemployment. And so you can imagine the potential that agriculture could have to address some of these socioeconomic issues. And then we also found that there's 80% of agricultural activity, which is performed by smallholder farmers. It's actually rain-fed agriculture. It's not irrigated, in other words. And while we've got this 80% of agricultural activity being performed by smallholder farmers, we unfortunately still are the lowest crop yield and agricultural productivity in the world. So there is it's a mismatch. And in 2016, there was a study that also showed that 218 million undernourished population and up by 44 million from 1992. And so I just reiterated here that we, Africa, or if I can say we, I'm based in Pretoria, yes, we remain the net importer of food, although it has 60% of the world's uncultivable land. So, and we are also importing food at very high rates. So this is some of the background of why transforming investments in African rain-fed agriculture initiative was initiated by SIWI. And with the challenges that I've just read to you, it's the sad thing is that at the center of all of this is the African smallholder farmer, typically engaged in rain-fed subsistence farming. And also a huge number of that actually is women, and also battling insecure land rights for themselves. And this, of course, threatens the equality, sustainable development, and also if there's land tenure issues, it also affects access to credit. So we believe that enhanced rain-fed agriculture has a majority, has a potential of producing much more food than we currently have. And also that in addition to this, we also have global climate crisis, which is threatening the livelihoods of many people across the continent. And we know what the results of this are, of course, is destabilized markets, increasing food insecurity, limited economic growth, and the likes. So in this illustration, I'll sorry, just get some water. In this slide, I will speak of, sorry, I think they had some construction in my office today, so maybe there's a little bit of dust. So on this illustration, I will speak about TIARA. So our starting point is the concept of green water, which represents about 65% in the water system. So when we speak of green water, we're speaking about the water that that runs off and infiltrates into the soil and keeps the soil moisture for use by crops when it is hot and when it is not rainy season. So that is the idea that we need to capture rainfall and make sure that it is not running off and wasted. So this is relating to catchment management and land management and user pay principles for the farmers. So I'll just give you a brief talk through the graphic that you see here. So we developed this graphic here to show you our approach. And you will see that at the bottom, we've included various approaches that we've identified that would contribute to enhanced rainfed agriculture. And this include conservation agriculture, climate smart agriculture, regenerative agriculture, rainwater harvesting, and landscape management and soil health. So if you look at the bottom rim where it's written management, we believe that the farmer is actually the first line manager of water, and what they do on their farm has a direct impact on people that are on the downstream, for example. So if you invest in farmers, for example, through capacity building, government coming through with advising, giving them the right seeds to use, and then you have a benefit in the economy where these people then become plugged in to the economy, and then we'll see improved resilience. And also this will also cause improving the micro level, improvement in the family and health of the farmers, where they will be able to generate income and actually basically be able to produce yield beyond just sustaining their own families, but be plugged in to the entire value chain. So this project that we're working on, Enhanced Rainfed Agriculture, this is the project summary. So what we're basically doing, we work across three streams of work, which is in the inception, we're engaging public and private sector to make commitments to enhance rainfed agriculture. So here is doing stakeholder analysis, identifying the governments which have already included in their national plans possibilities of scaling up enhanced rainfed agriculture. And then in the second phase, where we speak about business case, we want to look at the baseline of what farmers are actually producing without having contributed or maybe used inputs that come from rainfed agriculture, and make a comparison, for example, in a period of like 3 years or maybe 3 harvests, to see if there's been a change or improvement in the way the farmers are now starting to enjoy more yield. And then by doing that, they also needs to be capacity building. This is on the champions stream, where we want to develop a cadre of champions who would be responsible then to train their fellow community people on the practices of enhanced rainfed agriculture. And some of the practices that I mentioned that you may well know about, these are not new technologies or new practices, but these are practices which communities have long been performing in the past, like low tillage, mulching, and digging of potholes in the field, so that when it rains, the potholes are able to capture the water and infiltrate into the soil and moisturize the soil, even during periods where it's dry seasons. So we have actually piloted this project, or we are currently piloting it in the Zambezi watercourse. So the Zambezi watercourse is Africa's 4th largest river after the Nile, Congo, and Niger. It has 8 riparian states and also a population of over 40 million people. So you can imagine the consequence that rainfed agriculture would bring in terms of food security over the 40 million people. And some of the key issues that we have identified together with the Zambezi River Basin Commission, in short, ZEMCOM, there is persistent poverty, there's environmental degradation, and there's also competing uses for water. There's competing uses, like, for example, with the mining and then agriculture. And we have commissioned a land and water resource assessment and management for sustainable rainfed agriculture system study in the Zambezi Basin. And some of our tasks here included: one, to characterize the biophysical and socioeconomic factors, to apply a software that is called the WAMPA Watershed Management Protocol application, and then to also do the land degradation assessment and restoration. So this is where we would identify what kind of degradation has happened and what would be the appropriate intervention. And of course, capacity building that I've mentioned. And then here I will have the Rural Livelihood Support Program in the Zambezi. So the Zambezi Basin, through its secretariat, which is ZAMCOM, we have supported them to develop a strategic plan. And in that strategic plan, they've got components: infrastructure, livelihoods, natural resources, and water management. And SIWI, or the TIARA initiative, it finds its expression in the livelihoods component, where we are focusing on improving soil moisture capture. This is what I was talking about. And small scale water storage, rainwater harvesting, small scale irrigation, and bringing in new things like with technology, climate smart agriculture. So we are supporting them to build a case to show that there's a potential to promote runoff investing technology such as ponds and dams. And then within the Zambezi Basin, in the previous map that I've showed you, so when we did the study that I've just spoken of about now, we're able to identify hotspots where enhanced rainfed agriculture has a potential, or it is being practiced, but then there is no scale up. And so we are coming in to say, here are the opportunities for scaling it up. And so we have identified, for example, 5 hotspots, one being between the Lake Malawi and the Tanzania cross-border site, and then the Lusaka one, Iteji also in Zambia, and then between Malawi and Mozambique, and one also in Zimbabwe. Actually, we just came back from a field visit last week in Zimbabwe, where we met with the farmers themselves to see what are already the practices that they're already engaging in that needs to be documented and scaled up, and show the potential to government for a need for support in those practices, so that the communities can improve their yield, and that you may end up with more people working in agriculture instead of everyone then trying to flock to urban areas and scrambling for jobs which are very competitive. And briefly, I won't go through this so much, but then these are some of the selection criteria that we used to be able to choose the areas where we'll implement the project. But then in brief, it is hotspots that have the potential of rainfed agriculture, or there's a presence of farmers that are already practicing that agriculture. And then there's also extension services to farmers, which is provided normally by the Ministries of Environmental Affairs or Fisheries and Water in these various governments. So I won't dwell much on this, but then just to give you a snapshot of how we came up with selecting the 5 hotspots from the Zambezi River Basin. And then this is also some of the results that came from the study that we conducted, which just show the erosion risk in the various hotspots. So you can see all the hotspots here demonstrated with the risk that they have. And then on my top left, there's also the categories where you can see to what extent there is erosion. But then these hotspots being identified here, it means that all of them already have a risk of erosion and drought. So you may ask yourself, what exactly are we going to propose in those hotspots where we have identified that there is erratic rainfalls, there is drought, or there is no scale up of the crops, or maybe there's just really poor yield in the field. So we are proposing some agricultural measures, which include reforestation, We also have soil and water conservation in cultivated lands, agroforestry and conservation agriculture. This conservation agriculture is quite interesting. Also, for example, in Zimbabwe, actually the government has come strongly to encourage a concept which they call Pfumvuza, which is actually about precision farming. So they encourage farmers to take up some training courses on how to farm with precision, to know how much yield you will get. So for example, they would guide you in terms of how many holes you should dig within a farm and how many crops should be placed there and how many yield you should expect. So what we found with this Pfumvuza initiative by the Zimbabwean government is that a farmer would end up with about 52 rows which they have planted their crops on. And those 52 rows will also represent 52 buckets of yields of grain, which is actually 52 weeks for the entire year. So that is precision farming, not just to farm without an idea of how the spacing required in between the crops, but also knowing that you would making a calculated type of practice to generating your produce. So other mechanisms or measures would be gradual and bench terracing, or maybe contouring the land to ensure that there is not unnecessary runoff on the land where you have farmed, and that also causes soil erosion, as we know. And then farmer managed natural regeneration, and then bush-led establishments are some of the measures that we have started to identify could be applicable in the hotspots that I have shared with you. So in SIWI, we're also producing knowledge products or studies that we are conducting, which contribute to the business cases that we're speaking of. So the virtual jobs publication, my colleague Cecile will be sharing the links of this, is a publication that basically describes that the equivalent income of livelihoods that would be earned and supported if the food in sub-Saharan Africa was not imported, but then if it would be processed locally, marketed locally, instead of being imported. Those are the jobs that we are losing actually by importing food. We are transferring the jobs to other countries who process the food for us. So basically in the first bullet point, I mentioned that when food is exported from one country to another, all the benefits of employment and growth accrue to the country of origin rather than the importing country. So this is why we have worked on this virtual job study to show that if the governments make contribution or support the smallholder farmers by different inputs, could actually be now benefiting beyond just the yield or improved yield, but then there could be vast human capital and socioeconomic improvement. And then on the side, I just have a summary of from one of our studies that also show how it is cheaper actually to invest in enhanced rainfed agriculture, the methods that I spoke about, contouring, capacity building of the farmers, supporting the farmers in knowing which seeds to make use of in comparison to irrigation agriculture. So we, furthermore, speaking on the business models, we also conducted a study where we tried to identify the financial mechanisms of rain-fed agriculture. So what we have also found is that there is actually poor investments in rain-fed agriculture, and you cannot blame the potential investors. It's because there isn't enough business studies conducted that show the rate of return which an investor would actually get. So in this study, we identified about 6 financial mechanisms that potential investors could use as a vehicle for investing in enhanced rain-fed agriculture. The first one being the public and philanthropic funding, carbon finance, payment for ecosystem services, corporate practices, grants and sustainable procurement, impact investments and conservation finance, crop and weather insurance. My colleague will also share the link to the full report on the chat. But then one that I would like to actually highlight here is the payment for ecosystem services, which will also have a very great example from the Nairobi Water Fund. And this payment for ecosystem services as a business model, this is where you would have the landowners or the managers or the farmers rather, or the smallholder farmers, which are paid for the provision of environmental services. So if you have farmers which are at the catchment level, you would actually pay them to do the land restoration services, land restoration services, which would benefit the city, for example, or the private companies who are at the downstream. So at the moment, we do actually have farmers who are already taking care of the catchment by practicing low tillage, or not contributing to farming methods that cause erosion. But then those farmers are currently not being compensated for that. They're not being paid for it. So this is why we've identified payment for ecosystem services as one potential business model where farmers would not only make better yields, but then they would also be paid in form of money for taking care of the environment. So below here, I have the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund as a great example of how the private sector and the people that are at downstream can actually work with the smallholder farmers who are at the catchment level, who are taking care of the environment and actually compensating them for that work. And then I also just have here, we have identified during our study, as I mentioned, I said we are an advocacy initiative, but then when you get onto the ground and you start to speak on rainfed agriculture, you find that the concept is not well received because it sounds like you are reintroducing people to go back to the traditional ways of farming, which you would say maybe they are not so attractive even for young people to want to participate in that. So we have identified that we've got a big role to increase our advocacy. And I think this is where, as a policy institution, we struggle a little bit because we've also looked around for like media platforms where we could get support or gain support in terms of advocating for green water and enhanced rainfed agriculture. And also to be able to distribute those credible business cases that we'll be working on. And also there's a need to also contribute more to capacity building and the knowledge development, and also the need to use technology. And that would also attract younger people to be interested to want to work in the farms. I mean, we all know that in agriculture, most of the work is actually back-breaking because of it's hard labor. But then through the introduction of some technological devices like soil moisture sensors, or how to share information of when to plow, or early warning systems due to erratic rainfall. Those are some of the things that could actually attract young people to want to stay in the countryside and practice rainfed agriculture. And then also to blend finance to de-risk traditional instruments. So here we're speaking of, it is so hard for a financier or a private financier to want to loan the farmers or give them access to credit. And this is where maybe the government has a role to play by de-risking the farmer, ensuring that farmers have secure land tenure, which they can use as collateral to be able to approach the private financiers like banks. So,
sorry, Xanani, we are slightly running out of time. And we have soon to introduce our next speaker. Can you very, very quickly round off, please? And I'll see if we have any questions. Just a very quick round off, please.
Yes, I'll quickly do that. So this slide just show how to reverse the trends. So it just gives you on the second part of the page the activities that we're actually calling out for from governments and private sector, which is like investments, credit, land tenure, security that I've already spoken of. And I just wanted to also show you that there's also a strong gender equality and mainstreaming element in this, because where we're working usually at the River Basin Organization, there's like only 10% of women who are there. So with TIARA, we're plugging ourselves with initiatives that address gender equality, and I have mentioned them here. You can have a look at them. So it is important that as we do our work, we also highlight gender equality issues. And these are just some pictures from our previous trip to Zimbabwe, where we got to see communities who have now set up a community seed bank, where they store their seeds and are able also to sell the seeds to farmers, which can also sell it to other people. And yeah, I think that is all some of the publications that I've spoken about that you could make use of.
Thank you. We will, just as with the YouTube links, we will also share the PowerPoint presentations from today with all of you. Micah here has a question to you, Xanani. Do you feel that governments are actually more supportive of rainfed agriculture these days? And then second part of the question, because the potential is so big and obvious, why isn't upscaling happening more? Would you like to take the government question first, and then we talk about upscaling, but briefly, please?
Yes, so yeah, I would say compared to the time in 2018 when we were starting, we mapped through governments to see in their national development plans if there's any mention of enhanced rainfed agriculture, but then you find that there isn't. And most of the time is because of the lack of understanding or the lack of the knowledge and of the potential of it. So that's why there's still a great deal of advocacy that needs to be done around investing in rainfed agriculture. It's like a mindset shift. So, but then we were very impressed for governments like Zimbabwe now, who have come up with, endorsed it in their policy, this concept of Fumvuza, which is a rainfed agriculture practice for farmers to do. But then we do still experience that buy-in from politicians, it's quite difficult. So there's a great deal of advocacy that still needs to be done, hopefully through policy organizations like us, and maybe partnering with the media to be able to reach that kind of level of advocacy that is needed to raise the issues.
Right, and then also very briefly, the potential is very big, as we heard and we understood from your presentation. And Micah asked, why isn't upscaling happening more? Is it lack of finance, or is it lack of knowledge?
I would say also lack of finance. During our trip now in Zimbabwe, some of the farmers actually mostly complain about how labor intensive the working on the land is, like contouring. So you find that some family members, there's only husband and wife and maybe one child or two who are not able to work fully and dedicate fully their time to work on the land. But then also the financial part is also taking them through training. We understand these are traditional practices, but then when you want to introduce someone to precision farming, you want to be able to take them through the capacity building, and that is for the government actually to contribute to. So scaling up also has to do a lot with the financing, but also the mindset. I think we all look at irrigation as more progressive than enhanced rainfed agriculture. So I would say from those 2 points, those can also be some among the reasons why scale up is not happening.
Right, thank you very much. Very, very interesting there. Important to work on the change of mindset then. Cecile has also posted some useful links for everyone who wants to know more about TIARA. It's in the chat. I would like to thank once again Xanani Baloyi from SIWI in Pretoria. And we are now welcoming our next speaker, Laura Kurtzberg, Assistant Professor and Data Visualization Developer at the Florida International University. Laura, are you there?
I'm here. Good morning.
See you. Yes. Good morning.
Hello. Well, good morning for me. Good afternoon for those of you in the other time zone.
Good morning for you.
Yes.
You are with us from Florida, as I said, and you will teach us a little bit about investigative journalism, digging deeper, and how we can use digital tools for investigating climate and environmental journalism.
That's correct. Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to start by thanking the Stockholm International Water Institute for inviting me to speak today. And I'm going to share a few slides to talk about some work that I've been doing. One moment here, just setting up this. So my presentation today is called Dig Deeper, Digital Tools for Investigative Climate and Environmental Journalism. And you can see my information up on the slide. If you're interested in the topics that I talk about today, please feel free to email me at lkurtzby@fiu.edu. As Girl mentioned, I am an assistant professor at Florida International University. I teach data visualization, mapping, and all kinds of data journalism topics. I also work for a group called Ambiental Media. And Ambiental Media is a Brazilian news organization, a small kind of scrappy independent team that is specializing in transforming scientific content into accessible journalism. And because the team is based out of Brazil, a lot of our work does intersect with the Amazon rainforest. So you can see a few examples along the bottom of the screen here of some mapping projects that I've personally worked on. And you can see more if you visit ambiental.media. We have quite a few stories, not just about the Amazon, about all kinds of different environmental regions in Brazil. And most recently, we took a close look at water issues in the Amazon. And so we produced this story that I'm going to present to all of you as kind of a case study called Aquazonia. And this was supported by the Serrapilheira Institute, which is an organization to support science in Brazil. And they kind of took a chance on us as a journalism organization to do a little bit of a different look at this issue and to just talk about the importance of the freshwater basin of the Amazon for the entire ecosystem of the Amazon, the entire environment of Brazil, and really the impact that it has on the environment of the world. So I'm going to take just a minute to open up this page and share my work with all of you, because I think it's a good example of the kind of thing that you can do if you use the digital tools that I'll present in just a moment to try and tell a story about water issues. And I'm going to put the link to this story in the, actually somebody might have already done so. Oh wait, that's the Ambiental homepage. So I'm going to put the link to this story in particular in the chat as well, in case anyone cares to read it. It's available in Portuguese and in English. So I built this website to host the story, and I also worked on the maps themselves. So we have kind of what we would call a scrolly telling format here. You can see all of the millions of little connections that the rivers make throughout the Amazon here. And what we did was we took a study of the basin and we conducted our own analysis on top of the existing scientific information. So what we did was we built a model of the human impacts to the water system, and we created what we call the Water Impact Index. So this was a collaboration between scientists and journalists. And you can see on the screen that the dark blue represents areas where the water is not so heavily impacted or is more protected. And the lighter yellow the color gets, the more human activities have impacted the water systems in that region. So you can see that areas that are traditionally known for deforestation and cattle ranching, we've all kind of probably at one point heard about those issues in the Amazon. Those same areas are also heavily impacted by harms to the water portion of the environment. But there are also other areas that are not as traditionally spotlighted in reporting, where water is the primary issue that's being impacted. And you can see that wherever there is a hydroelectric dam, that is one of the highest indicators for these kinds of impacts. So we were able to make these kinds of conclusions thanks to the analysis that we did as reporters. And that analysis was done based on something that you can see in this map, overlaying different human impacts. So every factor of impact that you see has a unique color was factored into our index. That includes things like forest degradation, which could include deforestation or could include thinning of the forest. It could also include forest fires. We included precipitation change, which was kind of like a way to think about climate change throughout time. If there had been a very large increase in precipitation or a very large decrease in precipitation, this could lead to either flooding or droughts, and that impacts the water system as well. We have agriculture, hydroelectric plants, like I was talking about earlier, illegal mining and legal mining, and some other impacts that you can see here. And when all of those things are put together, what we get is this index and the gradient of impacts from very low to extremely high. So I won't scroll through this entire page, but I will kind of jump ahead to the end, because at the end of this story, we have an interactive version of our map. So if you check this out, you can kind of click around and see the value of the index that we calculated for any of the micro basins within the Amazon that you would like to click on. And you can also look at the individual layers that we discovered or that we basically visualized from input from scientists and other kinds of organizations that gave us access to their data. And so you can see, for example, that in this region near the National Amazonia Park, this particular microbasin is 25% of it is covered by illegal mining, and so on and so forth. So anything that you're interested in looking into, you can read more about, and you can also sort of explore on your own on this map. So I think personally, just to toot my own horn a little bit, I think this is a good example of journalists using digital tools, and I'm hoping it can serve as kind of inspiration and a case study. There are some questions. I might just answer a few before going to the next portion to kind of keep that flow going. Claudia said, your institution studied if there's a relationship with the Paraná Basin. In 170 years, a phenomenon appeared that had no flow. Claudia, I'm not sure about what your question is there. Are you saying that you know of a study of the relationship with the Paraná Basin? That sounds very interesting. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting your question correctly. Micah said, how much technical effort / expertise is required for a project like that? So that's a really good question, Mike. I worked on this project and I've been doing mapping and data visualization for quite a while, right? So I would say I have some expertise that I've accumulated through the years. But, and I'm going to talk about this in my slides, you can use a whole host of free tools that do not require code to try and make something like this for yourself. So some of these tools that are on the screen right now actually do require code. I'll talk about what each of these icons represent, but it is possible to make an interactive journalism story without technical expertise if you're able to find your way around the user interface of some of these point and click tools. And the second part of my answer to your question would be that even if you don't have technical expertise, many times if you're a freelancing journalist or if you work within a newsroom or an organization, there are people that you can collaborate with that do have this type of expertise and who are very willing to kind of help you and teach you some of the skills that you might need. So on the screen right now, you can see some of the tools that I used for the project. I did use some code. On the left hand, you can see the icon for Python and for GeoPandas. These are coding tools, right? But I also used things like Excel to filter the data. And the most important tool that I used is QGIS. So I'd like to just take a quick temperature check, and maybe you can put a little icon in the Zoom, or you can put a comment in the chat. How many of you are familiar with GIS or have heard about QGIS before? And if you want to, you can kind of just put something in the chat. So Marisa says, yes, I've heard of QGIS. Okay, so there's some familiarity. Micah says no. All right, so just to give a brief comment about what that might stand for. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, and QGIS is an open source tool to use GIS on your computer. So you can download QGIS and you can work with all kinds of different mapping files to analyze the data and to create your own static maps. Claudia's already familiar, that's great. So some of you might be familiar with the tools that I'm going to talk about. I also have icons here for Mapbox, which is not completely free. It's more like freemium. I'll talk a bit about that in a second. And also Google Earth Engine. These are all the tools that I used to produce the Aquazonia project. All of these tools fit into this flowchart in some way, and some of them fit into more than one box. So the steps that I had to take were to first just find the data that I needed to tell the story. We tried to find as much data as possible to represent human impacts throughout the Amazon. And this was actually quite difficult because sometimes we would get in contact with a researcher and they would have really good data about, let's say, pesticide use, but it would only be in one state of the Amazon or in one sampling of agricultural areas. And even though sometimes you can kind of extrapolate to the whole Amazon, we weren't necessarily able to do that with all of the data that researchers had produced. So we were limited in a way to only data that covered the entire Amazon. So we had to find that. And that came sometimes, like I said, directly from scientists who were kind enough to share their data with us. That came sometimes from Brazilian government sources, which I'll share with you in just a minute. And some of the data came from non-governmental organizations who produce their own research and publish their own open, free data. Once we had found that data and understood what the different columns meant, what the different variables were, we still had to kind of clean it up and do some summary information because we didn't just want to know how much precipitation change had happened in the Amazon. We wanted to know microbasin by microbasin, how these impacts could be summarized. So I had to do a lot of calculations using tools like QGIS and Excel to see, for example, what's the average change in precipitation within a microbasin, or how many square kilometers of forest degradation happened in a particular microbasin or around a particular river or within a particular indigenous territory, for example, right? And once we had this raw information, we started to analyze. Because we're journalists, we wanted to know what story does the data contain? What kind of narrative can we tell based on these numbers? So some of the tools that I used were for that specifically, for storytelling, for analyzing and identifying what questions we could ask and answer. And finally, we wanted to present this to the public, and we wanted to create that interactive website so that people could go and see for themselves. And maybe if somebody lives in the Amazon and wants to say, hey, in my city or on my farm, what is the impact? They can zoom into the map and try and answer that question for themselves. They don't have to depend on what we're telling them the story is. They can interact and go to our website and sort of get involved with this. So I'm going to go through the tools that I recommend. I think that just like Micah was asking, sometimes we could be a little bit hesitant to use these kinds of digital tools for the first time, but the ones that I'm going to present to you now are fairly user-friendly, and most of them are completely free. So they're a good place to start learning and to maybe start playing around with these things. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is the #1 resource that I use for this story. And this tool is from an organization, a non-governmental organization called Map Biomas. And they have 2 tools that I used quite extensively. The first is their general Map Biomas platform. And the second one is a specialized tool for water, which to this audience might be particularly interesting, called Map Biomas Agua. So I'm going to take a moment to open this because I think it's really cool. And again, I didn't work on this. I simply use this tool for my work. All credit goes to Map Biomas and the excellent research that they're doing. So with the Map Biomas Agua tool, you can see whether or not certain rivers might be growing or shrinking, right? How much of the surface is covered in water in the Amazon. And you can have an analysis over time, right? So you could go to a particular reservoir, for example, and summarize the water surface in that way. And there's lots of different things that you can do, but I would just encourage you to visit the tool and click around and see what you can discover. They have data going all the way back to 1985. And this data is based on satellite imagery analysis. So what they're doing is they're taking the satellite images and they're extracting the information for how much of the surface of Brazil is covered in water. Quite interesting. And they have some other tools in case you're telling other kinds of stories in Brazil, like, for example, land usage. So if you want to know how much of the land is covered by forest and how much of the forest has been replaced by deforestation and agriculture, you can do that with their tool. And you can go back in time, just like I said, to 1985. So if we go back in time to 1986 here, and then we go forward in time, we can see the huge difference of how much more of the Amazon is now lost to agriculture, right? So even just clicking around and zooming in could lead to some interesting stories here. Cecilia wants to know, is it only for Brazil? Yes, this particular tool is only for Brazil. So it's important to keep that in mind. If I zoom out, you'll see, well, it's taking a minute to load because I'm sharing my screen, but you'll see it's limited to the outline of Brazil, right? But if you're doing a comparative analysis with some other region in the world, it could still be quite useful. And if you're interested in forests specifically, and you want to read about these impacts in the whole world, I would recommend the Global Forest Watch tool, because this actually does apply to the entire world. However, they don't have a spotlight on water, so it's going to be a little bit more limited to only trees, tree cover, land use, and those kinds of analyses if you go to Global Forest Watch. So both, I'll put the links in the chat in just a second, Global Forest Watch and Map Biomas Brazil. Oops, I sent this to someone privately, my apologies. So both of these tools allow you to download the data for yourself. And I think that's very important, because a lot of times if you're going to tell your own story, you're going to want to download these things and potentially upload them to your own website, or start analyzing them in QGIS, which is, once again, my #1 recommended tool. So that's Map Biomas. Map Biomas is a really great organization for these kinds of analyses. The second set of tools really are also specifically relevant to Brazil. So again, I apologize if you're not working out of Brazil, these might not be as relevant to you, but I think it's good to know that these things exist just as kind of, again, like a case study. The Brazilian government has a very robust system of data sharing, actually, that has been around for many generations. And it's put out by the organization INPE, which is kind of like the scientific and satellite imagery generating organization within the government. And I use these two tools for my stories quite a lot. The first is called Terra Brasilis, and it is about, once again, deforestation. There are a lot of tools about that for the Amazon and for Brazil, understandably. But you can also see some other kinds of variables here. Oops, I did not put this link in correctly. I'm just going to Google this. So you can also see Terra Brasilis, other kinds of variables besides just deforestation on their platform. And it is a good way to poke around and experiment with these kinds of tools, because once again, I think it's fairly user-friendly. So you can see, for example, this hidrografia layer shows you all of the water systems within the Cerrado system of Brazil, or the Cerrado biome of Brazil, I should say. So it's not only the Amazon, there's also data specifically in the Cerrado that's very relevant to water and very relevant to fresh water in particular. And since I'm sharing my screen, this is going to take a while to load, but I really recommend that you check this out if you're interested in environmental reporting outside of or inside of Brazil. The other tool that is probably important to mention is called BD Queimadas. And we'll see if I put this link correctly. Yes, I did. Okay. So this one is about forest fires. And you might be thinking, well, what do forest fires have to do with water? Am I actually interested in this? Well, actually, forest fires, we found, can have a big impact on the water ecosystem because they might, be in the same areas. A lot of times they are in the same areas where other human activity is happening. So forest fires can actually be a really good predictor of where deforestation is going to happen later on, where agriculture is going to happen later on, and where some kinds of urban construction and hydroelectric dam construction is going to happen. Because before humans can build these huge ranches or these urban areas, they often have to burn down the existing forest. So it might be a unique indicator that you could consider for a story. And by the way, these links are all in the slides, so I'm not sure if we'll have the opportunity later to share, but I'm very happy to share these later if there's a way to send them out to everybody. So you can click on these links individually, maybe that would be easier than kind of having a growing list in the chat, potentially. I'll defer to the organizers here for that. All right, and now it's time to talk about QGIS. So you can see that I have labeled QGIS as being useful for analyzing data and for visualizing data. And many times, if we're writing a story, we kind of want to immediately go to the place where we are creating a complex, interactive, scrolly telling type of map like what I showed. But we don't always have to do that. Sometimes a picture that is static, that is not interactive, is more than enough to describe the environmental story that's happening in a region. And for that, QGIS is actually a great fit. So if you're going to invest time in learning just one of these tools, I would say go for QGIS, because this allows you to do analysis. It allows you to create a spreadsheet. If you're already familiar with data journalism and working with Excel, you can export your data from QGIS to any other tool that you're familiar with. And it allows you to get extremely advanced and actually do coding with Python and with other kinds of scripting languages directly in QGIS. So you can start off as a beginner, and the more you do and the more stories you produce, the more you'll be able to use this tool for advanced analysis. Okay, so I have some kind of videos out there to recommend for how to use QGIS. I would say just email me and I can send you some of my, YouTube tutorials, courses, and all these things. But the best way is just to download it to your computer and start trying to make things happen. Because if you open QGIS for the first time, you'll see there are so many little buttons. It's very difficult to know what each of these little buttons does, right? But if you try to do something simple, like I want to show a map of my city with the largest river of my city prominently colored in blue, right? Something simple like this. And you give yourself an exercise and a goal, it's going to become a lot easier to start to decipher the user interface of a complex tool like QGIS. And it's actually going to be a lot easier than you think. So if anyone here has used something like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, at the beginning, it's quite difficult to have this learning curve and try and use something for the first time. But over time, it really becomes easier. And QGIS is completely free, open source software. You don't need the internet to use it. It's downloaded to your computer and it's compatible with, Windows, Mac, all of these things. For those of you that are familiar with QGIS, you already know what I'm talking about. But if you're interested in kind of learning more about it and continuing to use it, maybe those tutorials would be interesting to you as well. So QGIS, very important. And there's one more tool that has this capacity for starting small and getting quite advanced. And this one actually requires that you request a login. So you have to sign up and request access. And that's Google Earth Engine. Google Earth Engine does require scripting and code. But if you've ever done any kind of code in Python or maybe JavaScript, using this tool will be fairly easy for you. If not, there are many pre-made scripts that you can look for if you search for Google Earth Engine, analysis of tree cover, for example. There might be some things that already exist out there. And Map Biomas, for example, you can open their data in Google Earth Engine, and they have created buttons where you can just point and click and say, I want to download data just for my state or just for my region within Brazil, right? And you don't necessarily have to use code. So I think it's important to kind of know that this exists, even if you're not going to go in and do any heavy duty coding yourself. If you start to collaborate with other technical people out there and you know, like, listen, I know we can use Google Earth Engine. I know we can open satellite imagery. And I know that we could maybe look at the kilometers of tree cover in this region. Just being able to communicate about the tools and being able to ask for help is a good thing to note. And finally, Mapbox is something that I recommend for visualizing your data and publishing your own interactive maps. And Mapbox is free for up to, I think, 500,000 map loads. So it gives you quite a bit of wiggle room in that freemium space. I definitely recommend creating a Mapbox account and starting to play around with their interface as well. So that's another one of my top recommended tools. Just keep in mind that they do get expensive after that 500,000 map view cutoff. So I heard about somebody, I think it was in Indonesia, who made a viral map of how COVID was impacting their city. And they got more hits on their website than ever before, which was great. But then they were hit with a Mapbox bill that they didn't expect, and their small newsroom in Indonesia wasn't really set up to receive this kind of information and to receive this kind of bill, really. So just keep that in the back of your mind. It can get out of hand. Okay, so I did include EO Browser here as a source of satellite imagery. I'm not really going to talk about that too much because I do want to have time for questions. I'm going to jump ahead to the questions portion for these last few minutes, but there's going to be more information about my project on these slides, and you can click through later if you have access to these.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. Very, very interesting and a lot of new tools to dig into for all of us who's been listening. We will share the PowerPoint with all the participants, so all the links will be there and everything else, because it was so much information. It's like, oh, well, where am I going to start? But you will all get it in the PowerPoint. Any more questions directly now for Laura that you would like to ask? Anything in the chat box? Nothing as yet. I just wanted to very quickly, Ambiental Media, is it possible to get access to their articles, or how do one go about that? Because I know that there are articles offered to the press, but how do one go about it?
So if you wanted to, for example, republish one of our articles on your own platform, you can just reach out on the contact page of Ambiental Media or just email me directly, because we do allow other people to publish our work as long as, we're collaborating together. So I would say just email us. That's the easiest way right now, and that's definitely a possibility.
Thank you. I do recommend everyone who hasn't seen Ambiental Media as yet to visit the website. There's a lot of interesting read there. And Laura has very kindly shared her email, so feel free. And Mikey, that's perfectly fine. See you soon. She's leaving early. I think we will now thank you, Laura, and welcome our next speaker.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Tobias Schmitz. I guess that if I'm correct, you are talking to us from Tajikistan. Is that correct?
Yes, hello everyone.
Yes, hi Tobias. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, and greetings from Geneva, from Tajikistan, where the second conference on the decade for water for sustainable development has just concluded. So I apologize for joining you late.
But thank you for joining us.
The ceremony, and so I rushed over here from straight from there.
Thank you very much for Tobias to be with us. A short introduction: development advisor at the Water Diplomat and Geneva Water Hub. And you are going to talk to us a bit more about what the Water Diplomat is and does, and also Uska News, two platforms working to mainstream water news beyond the water sector.
Yes.
So I'll leave it all to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I don't have a presentation for you, but I would like to just, give you a loose presentation of what we aspire to do. Indeed, I am the development advisor for a monthly bulletin on water news, which is called the Water Diplomat, and it is sent to people through electronic mail. So they receive it in their inbox, and it reads like a newspaper. And it's basically a summary of the top global water news in any given month. And it is produced indeed in partnership between Uska News and the Geneva Water Hub. Now, if I go back in time a little bit, Uska News has been I would say the most important source of water news globally for the last 15 years or so, and reporting out of Edinburgh in Scotland, and previously out of Washington, DC. It was a very interesting service, but the Geneva Water Hub felt that it was an expensive service and that it was actually only accessible to fairly strong corporate entities and fairly large institutions who could afford the subscription. So the Geneva Water Hub felt that water news is a very important aspect. Therefore, they partnered together to create a free online news service, which would be accessible also to countries of the South who cannot necessarily afford the subscription fee. And because the Geneva Water Hub is also the secretariat for the global high-level panel on water and peace, we try to organize the media reporting coming out according to the 6 themes of the global high-level panel on water and peace. So our first section, for instance, covers water in situations of conflict. And we would typically cover stories which, look at the destruction of infrastructure, for instance, currently in Ukraine and in Burkina Faso. And recently there's been an attack on water infrastructure in Egypt. So we would group together our stories around these kind of topics. And the next chapter, for instance, is on transboundary water law and international cooperation across jurisdictions. So any kind of international agreements on a shared river basin or disagreements on a shared river basin would be covered under that title. So we have 6 different chapters in which we order this media. And the Water Diplomat, as the title suggests, is focused very much on the international diplomatic world. And we would like to slowly become a key source of water news for the international diplomatic community. And as such, we became, we partnered with the Executive Secretariat of the 9th World Water Forum. in order to encourage media coverage of the event. And we did a training for non-water specialist journalists, a kind of Water 101 course, to update them on all the current decision making that is taking place around the world on key aspects of water decisions. And so that prepared a whole group of journalists to actually come to Dakar. And currently there is the trajectory which goes from the World Water Forum through the Tajikistan Water Forum. And in parallel also there's the preparations for COP27 in Egypt, in which it is expected that water will be very much at the heart of the climate discussions for the first time ever, although it was announced at Glasgow at the COP26, and water was recognized as being an integral part of climate change, at least in terms of the effects of climate change. It has not been very well covered within the COP debates, and we're very happy that Egypt is now accepting to push this forward. And so we are part of a coalition of organizations which is trying to mainstream attention for water within the context of COP27. And we would like to maintain the coverage, media coverage on water, all the way through to the big United Nations conference on water in New York in March 2023. So we actually, there is now a call for commitments in preparation for the UN 2023 conference next year. And I actually think it would be a very good idea if journalists could work together to make a joint commitment to construct a platform and to work together to support the coverage of water news throughout this coming and very important water year. So for instance, I've agreed with Abdullah Yasseni, who is the executive director for the 9th World Water Forum, to conduct trainings of journalists throughout Africa. We are doing first West Africa, then we will be doing journalist training in North Africa. After that, in Nairobi, we will be covering East Africa, and later in Cape Town, we will be doing Southern Africa. The whole idea being that Africa is very far behind on its SDG aspirations. There is a strong lack of access to drinking water and sanitation on the continent. It is a continent very exposed to the effects of climate change, and there are numerous other issues taking place on the continent, which are very much worth covering. So we would like to make sure that there's African journalists are covering water to a maximum extent, so that, let's say, the public voice from Africa in terms of the expressions of will of the African people, intellectuals, NGOs, etc., can be covered in much greater detail, and so that there can be a sustained public debate on water right through to the UN 2020 conference. Now, I have to tell you, because our colleague Gurel has been, he's been posting the link to the USCA News website. Now, it's been a very sad experience for us, but the editor of USCA News had long COVID, and unfortunately passed away in February this year. And so there has been an ongoing discussion now about what to do with this extremely important source of water news. And so we would like to keep the website alive, but it has been fairly dormant for the last 4 months. And we have been able to put out the Water Diplomat despite David falling away. So we are continuing his work as a team. But it is, we are really scratching behind our ears and asking ourselves, you know, what can we do? Certainly at this important moment where we feel that water news needs to be mainstreamed, we need to, I believe we need to try to save USCA News, to re-establish a central point where all the water news is brought together. And if journalists would agree to a joint pledge to cover water news during this year, to really increase public attention for water, that would be a really fantastic takeaway for all of us, I think. And I can bring that to the committees who are, you know, overseeing the whole process of the water dialogue until New York, and offer that as our contribution to the entire effort. And I'm biased as a journalist, but I think it's a very important aspect, the media coverage. And in fact, I think most public officials to things through the media. They react to articles in the media. Most people who know anything about water in the general public are informed through the media. And in general, I just think that we have an incredibly important role in trying to translate all these complex issues which take place in terms of dam building, responses to climate change, pollution, et cetera, et cetera. We have a responsibility to try to report them in a comprehensive and fairly simple, accessible way without getting too complex, in such a way that we help people to understand the importance of these issues. Now, I know that 15 years ago, and I like to compare it with climate change, 15 years ago, climate change was just on page 12 of the average newspaper. It was in the scientific section. And journalists have worked together very, very effectively over the last 15 years to get to the front pages of news where it actually belongs. Change. I don't know if you can still hear me properly. Am I still accessible? I'm sorry, the connection is not very strong.
Now you're accessible. It was a bit of crackling, but I think that we got most and we can hear you again. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe that just as climate change, journalists managed to get climate change to the forefront of the public agenda over the last 15 years, I believe we can do the same thing with water. And because 90%, for instance, of all natural disasters have a water-related aspect in them, and because of the floods and the droughts that we can see multiplying around us every day, it is very clear that that water and climate change are interrelated, and I think we can do a good job to bring those two aspects closer together. This is essentially what I wanted to share with you. It's not a very long presentation that I have. Just to share where we are on this process, and I very much look forward to engaging with all of you, in fact, to see in what way we can work together to help to mainstream water news in the future. And I feel a sense of urgency because there is this call for commitments, and I don't think people will really understand the importance of the high-level international water discussions unless we help to put that message out there. So this is essentially my key message, and if anybody has questions about what I'm presenting, then please take your opportunity now to discuss with me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to Tobias for joining us. My first question to you is, you were speaking about this training for African journalists. If one is interested, or if there are any of the African journalists interested, and I will also share your answers with the rest of the group who will join afterwards, the recorded session. How do we get in touch for this if one is interested? How do one get information about the training?
I think Gürel has my email address, and I'm happy for him to share it with the entire group.
Sure.
And if anybody has questions, I can respond to them with whatever information they want. There's quite a bit of documentation, of course, for each area, and some of them will be francophone, some of them will be anglophone. So it depends on what language you read again. So I would say, send me a message, and I can share what is probably most appropriate, for the training in question. The one that's closest is the one in Dakar for West Africa, and it is taking place from the 4th to the 8th of July. So that is a fairly short-term upcoming event, and we would like to encourage journalists from West Africa to attend. We would like to have we're looking for 50 to 60 journalists in the course, but of course most of them won't be able to travel, so we'll have a hybrid training, and we're looking for an absolute minimum of 15 journalists in Dakar. and we will ensure that they have contacts with high-level people who are part of the training, so that they can immediately, if they would like to, they can interview people in the African Development Bank, people in the UN system, people from the Ninth World Water Forum, etc. So that it's also linked to, you know, providing access to high-level figures who may, you know, help you to write your story. So that is basically the setup, and happy to share with my email with everybody, and we can have a dialogue by through email.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will share that with the group. Does any of the other participants have any other questions? Otherwise, I also wanted to ask you, when we're talking about raising the attention of the media attention, or the attention of water, putting water on the front page, what water stories are you missing out there? What is it that we don't hear about?
Well, I think a lot of the discussion that is taking place here in Dushanbe, and something which keeps coming back, is to communicate to people outside the field, the water field, to make them understand the importance of water. I mean, we know it, but for instance, if we look at the global food supply issues at the moment, the rising costs of food, etc., I'm not quite sure to what extent people know how much of that is actually, you know, how strong water is actually involved in producing those foods, and to what extent it is critical to secure food system. We actually have to have secure access to water. So I think by looking at different sectors such as tourism, agriculture, but also topical themes which are in the media right now, and trying to see if we can connect them through stories to water. That is a key issue which I think would be important at the moment, to try to underline the importance of water for pretty much everything that we do, whether it's the protection of nature, or every sector of our economy, or, you know, our social services, and making sure that people are you know, in a good state of hygiene, and in periods of the COVID epidemic and other health-related emergencies, water is absolutely crucial to maintain public health. So I think if we look at it from different perspectives, such as health, agriculture, etc., that really helps to increase people's understanding that water underlies pretty much everything that we do.
Thank you. I think that's a very good takeaway message. Basically, link water to every single story, yes, because that is how important it is, isn't it?
Well, thank you. And I would be interested if people are willing to respond. You know, I am doing a bit of a call for action here to say, you know, can we work together to commit to increase the coverage of water stories, and can we do that, you know, during the course of this year, perhaps in relationship to each other, so that we, you know, we can promise to the world community that we will ensure from our side that in any case public attention for water is sustained.
Yes, thank you, Tobias. I'm going to convey that message also to the rest of the group, and make sure that we keep up the dialogue. And if you maybe, yes, we can share the call to the training. Yes, Marisa, definitely share that. And also I'm thinking, if you have just a short message, maybe in writing, about the commitment and a pledge that you would like me to share with the group of journalists that we have in our network here, please pass it on to me, and I'll make sure that the group receives it.
I've actually just written a story for Uzka News and for the Water Diplomat on the commitments issue, all for international commitments of all kinds on water. And the website has just been uploaded today. And the expectation is that from all over the world, people will start making commitments towards this UN conference. And so I can share this story with you, and I think that gives you a bit of the background. It also gives the website link to the site where the commitments can actually be uploaded through a form. So if we get to the point where we can do this together, which I would really love to achieve, then we can submit through that same form, which I will share with you, via the article.
Thank you.
Is that a way forward?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And then we have all the journalists on board. Thank you very much, Tobias, for joining us from all the way from Tajikistan and Dushanbe. I understand it's not easy to get away in the middle of a conference, but thank you very much for your time.
And apologies for the connection, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone, and good luck.
Bye-bye. So that was our little round wrap up for today and for this session, our second session of the Communications Initiative 2022. Thank you very much for joining us.